the fact that we have a time to look at each other, talk to each other, share with each other is precious, right? It's these moments that really matter, actually, right? I'm going to remember this moment because I hung out with you guys much more than the bazillions of meetings that I've had in the last week, in the last month. That's what I think. And if we had a project in front of us and we were talking about something, we wouldn't have the same moments. We wouldn't have the same feeling from it, right? And that's ultimately what these conversations are about.
All right, let's get started.
I love it, baby. All strings attached. It's automatic, like how we laugh. I'm working for you. I'll break my back. I love it, baby. All strings attached. It's automatic, like how we laugh. I'm working for you. I'll break my back.
Hello, I'm RickMilenthal, and welcome to Engineering Brand Love, where we introduce to you exceptional leaders that leverage technology and creativity to do great things. Today, we have my good friend, Dr. Luan Phan, Chairman of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at The Ohio State University. It's considered among the largest and leading programs in the country. He's an international leader in anxiety, mood, and addiction research. He's involved in numerous research funded by the National Institute of Health. And amazingly, we'll talk about it today, he is the creator of the groundbreaking mission SOAR that is changing the world on what we know about mental health. Welcome, Dr. Phan.
Thanks for having me during this conversation, Rick.
Well, we know each other pretty well. Can I go with Luan?
Please do.
I love that. You know, I think I want to start with SOAR. I've been involved with you for years, helping on the communications of it. It inspires me, and it's a big reason I want you on today. Tell us about SOAR.
You know, SOAR stands for the State of Ohio Adversity and Resilience Study, but it's much bigger than that. As we begin to design and conceptualize what SOAR can do, we were facing what I believe to be the pandemic, the epidemic that is worldwide and nationwide, that is mental health challenges affecting all of us as patients, as families, and as communities. And with such a complex, broad, and complicated challenge, we needed to stand up an investigation that really tries to tackle the challenge head on. We felt that there was a need to think outside the box. We can only solve, as Albert Einstein said, and I will paraphrase, we can only solve the problem with something different than what got us to the problem in the first place. And so there needed to be a fundamental paradigm shift in how we looked at mental illness and mental health more broadly. So SOAR is an attempt to gather as much information as we possibly could from as many people as we possibly could, of all kinds of people across the entire state of Ohio, which we believe to be uniquely a microcosm of the country because of its geographic, demographic, ethnic, cultural, racial, economic, emotional diversity in that richness. And with that kind of scale, we can begin to ask these questions from as many Ohioans as we possibly could.
Now, it's fashioned after actually what was done for decades in cardiac care, wasn't it?
It was inspired by what the field in medicine knows as the Framingham Heart Study, which began back in 1948 in the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. And at the time, many Americans, and particularly men, were having heart attacks and showing up to the emergency rooms with a lot of heart attacks. And the investigators then began to ask the question of, what is this? how could it happen, and ultimately began to dive into, can we prevent it? What are the things upstream that might be causing heart disease in the first place? And really, that's the inspiration. And it followed generations. And the Framingham study continues to this day since 1948. So getting close to its 80th year, following generations over time.
So the way I understand it is a great deal of what we know about heart conditions and cardiac, we know from the Framingham study, things that we take for granted today.
Framingham produced a field of preventative cardiology, which is that you can be empowered to think about your heart health. And there are things that you can do in your life, in behaviors and in your lifestyle, that could prevent you from developing heart disease. And if you have heart disease, it could prevent the worsening of the heart disease and ultimately prevent the death and the complications from heart disease.
Yeah, so I would think what we know about cholesterol, what we know about exercise, what we know about genetics, what we know about stress, things that we just take for granted needed to be studied in order for us to understand both how to cure it and also for insurance to fund it. So I said that right, didn't I? Close? Yeah.
Yes. Framingham taught us that there are factors that are modifiable, that they change over time, and that we have the ability through our own personal behaviors, but also through treatment to modify those factors. And as you know, the big ones are sedentary lifestyle, blood pressure, high blood pressure, diet, obesity, high cholesterol, smoking. Those were all factors that were discovered through studies like the Framingham Heart Study.
So what you conceived of is, we did this in heart. There's probably similar things in cancer. What probably is hard for the rest of us to imagine, and you did imagine and now have executed, is this can be done in mental health.
Absolutely. We had a playbook, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel, especially if the wheel has been in existence for decades and has taught us so much on how to solve a very complex problem.
So what do we hope to learn in mental health, which I think is a mystery for many of us, isn't it?
It is. Mental health is a mystery. There are many more questions than there are answers when it comes to mental health. And what we hope to learn are to identify these modifiable risk factors and modifiable resilience factors that can empower us as individuals, as families, as schools, as workplaces to take on in order to prevent, or at least, if not to prevent, to also lessen the course of mental health challenges as they build up over time.
I assume as we learn that, not only will we be able to treat it, and it'll inform everyone throughout the world, it's also an issue of insurance, right? Insurance can only fund things that they can, I'll say it this way, that are predictable that what's being funded will actually have a result. And I assume that takes research, and new research has been nascent in mental health, and this hopefully changes that game, right?
Right. So it affords the ability to come up with new treatments that may interface with a patient and a provider in a clinic where insurance is very much involved. But it could also inform a new wave of technologies and platforms to address these modifiable factors that may go well beyond the walls of a clinical practice.
So what happened is about 5-6 years ago, we got to know each other and we met, and we decided to dedicate virtually all of our research, our pro bono resources, around promoting this so we can get funding and so we can advance it and so we can move it forward. And later in this conversation, I'll talk about what inspired us to do that. And I'll tell you, it's had an amazing effect throughout the agency. But I think before, how'd you come to this, doing this with your life? And
Well, I've always felt that with every challenge of life, an individual facing that challenge has choices in front of him or her. and how we face challenges and barriers and setbacks is fundamental to the building and the cultivating of resilience. This idea not only of the ability to bounce back past adversity, after adversity, but even to adapt and grow from that adversity. And I came to it personally because throughout my life, I've had a number of challenges that I seem to have on the surface overcome. And I've always been fascinated by this notion of empowering people and learning more about what makes someone really resilient. And how can that be converted to a playbook that we can teach our kids for generations to come? And so I've always felt that we learn the best when we're able to tell stories about our own experience. We in the field called it lived experience, but that's a fundamental, powerful tool by which we continue to learn and adapt and come up with new ways to address challenges and adversities and stressors that come on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day, week-to-week basis in our lives.
Right at the core of that, both telling a little bit of your story, but what you said is in the whole world of mental health, the whole world of our health, being able to tell our story or telling stories is important.
Very. We probably don't do enough of sharing of the stories. And one of the challenges with patients struggling with mental health challenges is that they feel alone, that they are in this fight by themselves. And that sense of being alone, that loneliness is pervasive. It's pretty deep. And I think that having the ability, the space, the landscape, the communal sense to share stories with each other is really healing at its core. But fundamentally, it also connects us to each other. It makes us feel less alone. And that's really powerful.
That's why we're sitting here with a podcast that mostly folks in marketing are to listen to. And usually we have marketing executives on. And I couldn't wait to have you. That fundamental fact that you just said, that storytelling is so important. I thought it was like the one area we could help raise money for things because we're communicators. We can motivate things. But I felt like what we do, and many people listening here, we're in the business of words and communication. And what you're saying is stories and words matter in mental health. Maybe I go as far as they can cure. They can cure in mental health.
There are definitely powerful ways in which we could address the challenge, for sure. And the undercurrent of storytelling is not just a recanting of the history or the set of events, but it's the embed of those events with emotion, with feeling. And it's really the emotions that carry the weight, the value, and the impact of the story.
Yeah, my friends in the industry, and the reason we started this podcast, there's a lot of stress going on in our industry right now. There is in every industry. It was just an announce, for you to get context, because of business consolidation, maybe AI, different reasons. Some of our largest companies are letting go 10, 20, 30,000 people. It is a business that at its heart should be about joy, and we have such great joy with it. But honestly, I've been worried about many people in the business because it is something, it's a creative world. And that means we create things, we share it, we say, how do you like it? And most times, either nicely, someone says, well, can we do this? Or someone says, it sucks. What you created is shit. It sucks. It's not going to work. And it's a business world. So both actually is acceptable. But in our hearts, what it means to us, people that do this, you can imagine that it almost builds up. And I think mental health's even a bigger issue in our industry. Does that make sense, Luan, that might be the case?
No, it does. I mean, I am obviously not in the field, but I think broadly speaking, we're all wrought with anxiety around uncertainty. And that's probably uncertainty and apprehension that comes with the unknown. What's going to happen next is what unnerves, unrattles a human quite a bit. So, uncertainty is a culprit here. In many fields, and including your field, there's a performance measure to it. Some of that performance is a individual element, some of it is a collective group element, but at the end of the day, there's a product, and that product is a deliverable via the performance that comes together in order to produce the product, right? And so there's an element of performance standards and ultimately how it is perceived by the audience to which you are presenting the message and the product.
That's amazingly said. I have a surprise visitor for us. I didn't think he could join us because he was traveling and flights, and he pinged me that his flight was hours late, and he's a good friend of both of us. David Grzelak, my business partner and co-founder, and is really an inspiration for what we're doing in mental health. David, you just joined us as you were listening to Luan and what he said.
Yeah, one of the things too about, I think, you were talking about the industry and some of the uniquenesses, and it is performance. And I think one of the things that also is an additional layer to that is that it's a subjective layer of performance, right? You're being evaluated. It isn't like you take a test and it's black and white and yes, you're right or you're wrong and you can live with that. You're just putting stuff out on a continual basis, whether that's strategy or creative, something in your imagination. And someone tells you it's wrong, you have to wrestle with, well, like, how much weight do I put in this person's opinion? And you see that, in the psychology of our employees where, like, well, I'm not sure the client had the right perspective there. I'm not sure that, this person had the right perspective. And it's just out there, and you have to be so vulnerable and maintain kind of, your the foundation of your beliefs and what you see and what your vision is, despite being told no, despite being told things don't work, to be able to still tap into that vulnerability and tap into that creative space in an energetic way is tough. It's really tough. And I think it is more complicated because it's not right or wrong. It's not black and white. You're just on your own to decide that. And that's a interesting dynamic for people to find themselves in when they're being evaluated based on performance.
It definitely does. And to echo that and add a bit, some of that vulnerability often manifests itself or displays itself because you have to express, you have to give something, you have to show something. And when it's met with a neutral or a negative reaction, you feel that reaction personally and you take it personally, that it wasn't enough and that you weren't enough, or maybe you didn't put enough into it. And so when you take those things personally and those things build up in time, that's where the vulnerability is. And it may slow you or even stop you from expressing or producing like the way that you had before when you started.
Man, I love that. I got to tell you, so many of our friends, so many people listening are going to relate to that. You nailed it. And so many of us, the cliche is an imposter syndrome, right? I don't know. Look, I've only done this my whole life, 42 years. I've been in this business and I love it. I love every day of it. I love working with people like that. But I actually think that's one of the more beautiful parts of it. David, that beautiful part of what he said. Rampant insecurity in our business.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the business of 20 something years and had some success in this industry. And I'm surprised a lot of the, individuals that are my peers that have, the similar kinds of success. It's funny you said imposter syndrome because that comes up all the time in conversations. It's like, like there's like this almost protective layer that gets developed where like you're just trying to like not get got or not get found out or exposed too much. And people have that language because it's a true psychological thing that they're experiencing. that hurts. It's a reflection of you, and it feels like a personal insult. And to have belief in yourself and be able to do that, there's this counterbalance that keeps happening, the critical self-doubt, and then the confidence to get up in front of the room again and share another idea. And that juggling act is kind of the beauty of, all of humanity in a way.
I think about it. Don't compare your inside with other people's outside too, especially with social media where everyone shows their perfection. All we are is always in love and always having fun. And, look at our family, look at our life. It's great. And
that quote that you just said, Rick, is something that you said to me maybe 15 years ago and really, really stuck with me. And again, it was, in the context of advertising, and you look at people's websites, or you hear how they talk about the work that they're doing and all those things. And you can feel like, oh my gosh, we're not there yet. We're not good enough yet. But also, that was really great life advice as well. And I learned, got exposed to a lot of things behind closed doors that people weren't aware of. And on the outside would have looked at me and my family situation in a certain way and been evaluating themselves and comparing themselves to me as a level of success, while my insides, not my outside, were complete turmoil when I was struggling with depression and anxiety and suicide and all those things that, went through my family over the last 5 years and, or last 10 years now, geez. In 2018, I lost my teenage son, who was 17 at the time, who passed by suicide. Prior to his passing, I was in a similar role, chief marketing officer, partner in the business, and I was trying to do everything I can to be in and out hospital systems. I had moved with my son to California for a while and had a facility there in order to kind of help him deal with his mental health. And ultimately, we just, were unsuccessful in that battle. But as I was going through all of that, not very many people knew. Certainly people knew once my son passed away. And that was a learning lesson to me, because it was unhealthy for me to try to keep that inside. It felt, because it almost made me feel like shame and embarrassment that I was having these problems at home because people looked up to me and had a certain image of me. And it almost felt like pressure to maintain that image. And instead, what I've learned over time was, after I lost my son, just sharing that story and being able to talk about what I went through and what he went through, what my wife is going through, what my kids are going through still today, and how it's impacted their lives. Like Luan was saying earlier, it makes people feel not alone. It's a really important dynamic where I feel less alone as well, and just being able to, say things and speak things, speak things into existence. And there's an energy to that I think is a necessary part of healing and grieving and going through the tough times we have in our lives. And so, yeah. And the agency, when we talk about this business itself too, when I did that and I was very public about suicide and the things that my family had gone through, what really, really, really surprised me, and it speaks to the power of being vulnerable and people not wanting to feel alone, is that a lot of people in the agency started to turn to me for mental health advice and, want recommendations, want to talk about, what they're going through. And it caught me off guard at first, because in a lot of ways, like if you just do the rational, look at things, I was unsuccessful. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to navigate it. I lost my family, went through everything that it went through. And so it felt like, in a lot of ways, like, imposter syndrome. I'm the last person on earth that people would want to come to for advice, or I didn't even feel like, I was afraid to give them any advice. Like, what do I know? I don't have anything to offer. And what I found is they really weren't looking for advice. They just wanted to be able to tell what's going on in their lives and have somebody that's an understanding ear that isn't going to judge them for it. And because I went through all that, they had faith and belief in me. They could be vulnerable with me, and I wouldn't judge them harshly. I wouldn't look down upon them. I wouldn't change my perception of them. And that feeling of not being alone, was the greatest gift that I was able to give others after the passing of my son.
That story, which wasn't a story, it was a life. And David and I, good friends, and I actually did watch the 2 years beforehand. And 6 months after that, we sat down. David, you said, or we both said, because the other thing you experienced, or what you touched on, is the mental health system was tough to get the help you needed. And what I love about Luan is he knows that. He chairs a big part of the system, yet he just explained how he intends to change that instead of just live with that. It's a beautiful thing. But it did make us say, we got to do something, didn't it? We got to do something. And part of it is the stories getting out. And let me ask you something, David. When it was such an existential event for you, but became an event that all of us knew at the agency. Let me ask you, Luan, when David shared that story, you lived a good part of it with us, didn't you?
I did. And whether you call it fortunate or not, I met you both before David lost his son. And so I was aware of that. And certainly in the aftermath, I was there as well. So knowing that story has certainly enriched my work, but that's the wrong word to use. It motivates my work. It compels me and the team to really admit that we should be better, and we got to figure out how we can be better for everyone who's struggling.
Yeah, that we should be better. And then that turned to we could be better. We can be better. Here's a plan to be better. And a lot of it will play out when we're not here on this earth, won't it? I mean, this is not this is not a do it in 5-minute deal, is it?
No, it will take years and decades to come along. Earlier we talked about Framingham. It took a decade plus before the first set of findings came out, as powerful and impactful they were. To me, it starts with the audacity to be hopeful and the confidence that we can transform how we think about and approach mental health. And that hope, coupled with, of course, bright minds and talents and perseverance and good ideas and putting action behind ideas, are all critical to sowing the land and seeding the idea so that years to come, something comes of it.
David, Luan talked earlier about how important storytelling was. When this became apparent to others, people would tell you their stories, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and when Elizabeth and I first started to share our story and be just transparent and more vulnerable about the loss that we had, that is what made a difference. It, like I was saying earlier, it's a normal human experience that people didn't know what to say. When I came back to the office, people didn't know exactly what do you say to someone whose son just passed by suicide. And that was a tough moment for me as well, because I felt alone, and I felt like I just didn't belong in this environment. It just didn't feel, psychologically, emotionally, anything like that's where I belong, but I should be there. But once we started to try to make a difference and start by just being open and honest and sharing our story, that's when people inside the agency, people above our community, people that we've never met before that live across the country, really, truly started to reach out on a regular basis. And I had, calls from parents, employees with kids, at our company that would have issues and be struggling with things. And I'd be the first person that they'd come to and ask for advice. And that is a dynamic that surprised me, but did make me feel less alone. It gave me strength. It started in a very slow way to make me feel like I can find purpose in that loss. I think, that is the way that it works. Obstacles and struggles and things that you go through do make you stronger. I couldn't make any sense of that when my son first passed away, but over time, I started to feel like strengthened, by the ability to try to do something and try to make a difference. I'm more available to people. I am more empathetic, and more compassionate as a human being, both in my family and my workplace, everywhere in my life. And those are the kinds of transformations that happen if we can show up and be vulnerable with each other and trust each other and do that from a place of strength.
Let me come in here, if I may. So with all that I know and what I had said earlier about how I was searching to find the active ingredients in the playbook for resilience with my field and everything I know about being a psychiatrist and but being an investigator of the brain and someone who studies emotions and the power of storytelling. All of that in my backpack. When I lost my daughter unexpectedly in November of 2025, I was completely lost. I felt completely alone. Of course, I felt devastated, but ultimately, my point is that the expert or the poster child of resilience, who had all the tools that I had used to teach many patients and families about how to deal with loss and how to deal with grief, when I was struck with it, I was completely lost. And it was knowing that David was there and maybe he would be willing to share his story, it would help me. And that meeting since then has made me felt immediately, but has grown over time, this ability that I am not alone, that I can find some purpose and meaning in some future that I yet do not see. But that story from David resonated with me. But the most impactful thing was that it made me feel less lost and less alone and more hopeful.
You know, I didn't ask either of you to share that story, and now you've just shared it. You know, in a way that's going to be broadcasted. And I lost my father-in-law to suicide. You know, I probably don't compare it to what the two of you face, but of course, as we all know, nobody should project on anyone else. You know what their loss is. But I didn't expect you both to share that, and I think it turns what you just said about, in an esoteric way, storytelling into the truth. I bet you didn't know you were going to share that, Luan. So part of it, isn't it? I mean, that's it at the core. It takes courage and it takes the moment to share our stories, whatever they are. And the fact is that everyone's walking around with their story, isn't it? Whether as existential as what the two of you said or whatever they find. Isn't that sort of the core of this? Well, I guess what we said, don't compare your inside to an outside, but does it create empathy? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I mean, you have it's inevitable. I mean, it almost is, it's like a math equation, you know? I mean, how could you not be more empathetic for the things that people are going through when you know what it feels like to have gone through things? And again, it's not about apples to apples and what kind of thing are you going through. It's just everybody is going through it. Everybody is going through struggles that are feeling overwhelming at different times in their lives. And whether you're a leader inside the organization or you're running, you know, the largest study around mental health that's ever been done in the history of the world, no matter what role that you're in, that vulnerability is a requirement. I think if you want to be empathetic, you know, like the vulnerability is the next step. You have to lead. You have to open up the door to that, and then people will follow, and then people feel safe, and people feel like they can share, and that there is a more empathetic ear or someone that's understanding, non-judgmental, whatever words you want to use for that. But I think that's the key of it. I mean, you know, whether we're talking about our personal lives or we're talking about the office space, vulnerability is one of the things that is just critically important in human interactions. And sometimes, you know, in leadership roles, we think our job is to just give, you know, direction on the work and improve the work and do all those things. But we are dealing with a human being in every one of those instances. And the more that we realize that and are able to understand that these are vulnerable moments that they're having and be what we need to be in those moments, helps not just the company be successful. There's studies that are done that say, you know, you treat people this way, it's going to improve business performance. And that's all great. You know, who's not going to be signing up for that? But, you know, for me, it's just the human connection that is the most strengthening, gratifying thing that I could do.
In this beautiful business, invariably, the people that I think are the highest order of creativity and innovation, when I get to work with them for a long time, and there's in this environment that we have in which we talk openly about it, you both had the bravery to talk openly on this episode about it. Because of that, I'll be sitting with them and I'll be talking about something that's struggle business-wise or an achievement business-wise. Invariably, then they'll share a story.
Yeah, well, creativity is fairly broad and expansive word, but you see creativity everywhere, certainly in your business. You see creativity in the arts. You see creativity in healthcare in my world, and you see creativity in the day-to-day, right? I mean, I think it's pretty relevant here. And the question, I think that some of us, when we have a chance to ponder, is what drives that creativity, what promotes that creativity, and on the flip side, what blunts that creativity. Because I think we are all born with levels, a dimension of creativity. So there's a trait element to it, but there's also a state element to it. That there are moments where we have more creativity, and there are moments where we have less creativity. And understanding that part is also, I think, another fundamental human experience.
You know what else is on my mind is because we're living in a news-filled world, a political world, that unfortunately is relating vulnerability to failure and weakness. I mean, that's what's going on rhetorically right now. He or she's a loser because of this. And it's a megaphone right now. Now, I think it has an effect on all of us, all of my colleagues and everyone. It's the thing I'm worried about most right now. And you guys don't need to comment on it, but I don't know, David, I see it in our people when they.
Well, I mean, I think it's we just keep talking about it, but I mean, it is the antithesis of an environment that creates vulnerability. I mean, you're not really being vulnerable if you're just, that you share the same beliefs with somebody and you're expressing them, and then, punching down on people that don't believe what you believe. That's not vulnerability. That's like more of a protection of self and reinforcement of a way you want to feel about yourself and all those kinds of things that are happening today. And I think, society, culture, the workplace, our families, no matter what, unit you look at it, without the ability to be open and honest and be yourself and have a point of view and be open to hearing other people's points of view with that empathetic, understanding, compassionate, ear, you lose a lot. You lose a lot of the foundation that gives people strength and that makes them feel connected and makes them feel plugged into the world around them.
I always go back to thinking and believing that we are more alike than we are different as human beings. And in this life and in this world that is chaotic and uncertain, it is so instinctual to create a world in which it's us versus them, create divides and boundaries in order to be, as David was saying, self-protective, to sort of say, who is in my camp and who's got my back and who doesn't, and to identify persistently what makes us different every day. I think that there is going to be more good if we begin to think about that we're more alike than we are different, and that we can support each other, tell stories that show evidence that we are very much alike. And that idea, I think, really resonates with me sometimes. I often try to remind myself that we are more alike than we are different.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I was in a conversation just the other day about this topic in a way, and where my point of view, or at least the point of view I try to take, is that, people are all at their core very similar. The difference, even in these, vastly different points of view that people have, is only because of the life experiences that they've had. I mean, it's just the truth, like they only have such a different point of view from you because they've had different experiences. And that should be nothing but an opportunity to be like, okay, I could double up. I've had my experiences, you've had yours. I haven't had those experiences. Let me learn how that impacts a worldview and a belief system and the way people approach things. And like that, is, for me, even with the passing of my son, I became more devoutly religious, and carry that in my life. But that doesn't, people that are, atheists or believe what they believe or whatever, it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a debate. I'm not right or wrong or whatever. It's just, this is what I've gone through. And this is why I feel the way that I do. And if we focus more about, like, why do you feel the way that you do? Like, where does that come from? What kind of experiences have shaped you as an individual? There's a lot of beauty. There's a lot of connectivity. There's a lot of growth that happens. And what's happening today is this complete opposite of that. And I do worry. I do worry about how it impacts, everyone's mental health, how it's going to impact society moving forward. We need to learn from each other and grow from each other. That's how we become better human beings.
On a very pragmatic note, back to the word of creativity, it impacts creativity quite a bit as well, because under adversity and chaos, we often instinctually narrow down, we close off, we become very focal in our feeling, our thinking, and our behaving. And that constriction is a lonely space, but that constriction does not allow for us to think about other perspectives, think outside the box, think 2-3 steps or 2-3 angles in space and in time. We're so insular and encapsulated in a selfish stance that I think not only impedes our ability to connect with people, it also impedes our ability to be our most creative self, our best version, our fullest version of ourselves.
Yeah, that's it. And what's interesting is, in our business, that connecting with people is the whole ballgame. But we rarely talk about any of this, to make the connection. Another quote I like to use is, tend the garden you can reach. When we all think of the massive things going on the planet, what could we do and how could we touch? It's tend the garden we can reach. You, Luan, are reaching so many in this study and all you're doing. David and I reach it, in our firm. And I'm trying, we're trying with this industry that is so wonderful and so creative to reach folks. I think this has been a really, really, really important conversation. Dr. Luan Phan and David Grzelak, you are both great engineers because you're looking at technology and study, and a brand love, or certainly of love. Thank you so much for being with me today.
I love it, baby. Our strings attached. It's automatic, like how we